Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our live broadcast of the historic moon landing. Today's date is July 20th, and the year is 1969. And my name is Melissa.
And I'm Emily. If you need a recap of the space race thus far, we have you covered. It all started in 1957 when the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite into space. This was an unpleasant surprise to most Americans as it was the first man-made object to be put into space.
Meanwhile, on the U.S. side of things, let's start with the Vanguard project. This was our first steps into the cosmos, beginning in 1955. The United States military began to work on the creation of a satellite and a rocket to put it into orbit. After a number of failed launches, the U.S. managed to put the satellite Explorer 1 into space in 1958.
In order to better handle the task of space travel, President Eisenhower created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, an official civilian space program that ran independently of the military.
This leads us to the Soviet Union's Luna 2, which after a grueling 36-hour flight crashed into the lunar surface. However, a radio signal from it still reached the Soviet Union, confirming its landing.
And now onto the kidnapping of the Soviet Union's Lunik satellite. The kidnapping took place at night in 1959. A CIA team photographed every angle of the Lunik spacecraft to be able to move it without taking it off the crate. They studied every element needed to make it perfect without leaving a trace.
Later in 1961, the Russians would make Yuri Gagarin the first person in space with the Vostok 1 rocket, which would be followed shortly after by Alan Shepard and the Mercury program run by NASA here in the U.S. NASA would make 6 Mercury missions using information and experience they gathered in order to plan more ambitious missions.
In 1961, President JFK dramatically expanded the U.S. space program in hopes of landing a man in the moon. After just 4 months in office, on May 25, 1961, Kennedy stood before Congress and asked for an additional $7 to $9 billion to be put towards the space program over the next 5 years. During the short time prior to his speech, the U.S. had 2 major Cold War losses, first with the USSR sending Gagarin into orbit, then with the Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy's speech was given in hopes to restore confidence in America by surpassing the Soviet Union through these technological advances.
For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
By mid-1965, both the United States and the Soviet Union would complete more and more ambitious missions. These would include the first spacewalk, which was performed by Alexei Leonov and aboard the Voskhod 2 in March of 1965.
Not to be outdone, NASA's Gemini 4 would also perform a spacewalk, which was done by Ed White on June 3, 1965, and the first successful docking between two spacecrafts would be done by Neil Armstrong aboard Gemini 8 on March 16, 1966.
And with more effort being put into the space program between 1961 and 1964, NASA saw a budget increase of almost 500%, which also helped increase public awareness and perception of the space race. This leads us to the Apollo programs.
This long-running program has not been a cakewalk.
With Apollo 1, we saw a disaster strike with a fire in the capsule killing the entire crew.
Next up is Apollo 4, 5, 6, and 7, testing various internal systems to avoid further disasters like Apollo 1.
Apollo 8 brought us the first manned moon orbit, taking our astronauts all the way around the mysterious dark side of the moon.
Next, Apollo 9 demonstrated functional systems for a lunar landing.
This leads us up to today with Apollo 10, which was a successful dress rehearsal for landing on the lunar surface.
And today we have Apollo 11, which is due to be the first manned EVA of the lunar surface located in the Sea of Tranquility. So let's take it to Mission Control with our live broadcast with Ingrid.
Here we are at the Mission Control in Houston, patiently waiting to receive the transmission from the lunar surface of the first manned EVA. This is a great step in the history of our great nation. Looks like we're getting something.